This is a board where if villain were to just bet its whole range, you have to check raise extremely aggressively. And king 10 is a nice hand to do it with. So Crazy Tiger must have opened very small. And we defend king queen off in the big blind. I would like to see you sometimes 3-bet this hand, but not always. If you always 3-bet these types of, king, queen, ace, jack type of hands, it's a bit too loose, right? You end up with too many of these, marginal hands out of position. At the same time, your hand is quite far ahead of your opponent's opening range. So villain bets, third pot, and on this board, we are doing pretty well on 10-8, 10-8 deuce. We have flush draws, we have a lot of 10x, 8x, we can have pocket 8s, pocket deuces, a lot of straight draws and overcards. So this hand will definitely be check raised sometimes. It's a hand that doesn't get to showdown and win very well, but it does have great backdoors, right? So it also blocks two overpairs in villain shoes. So I wouldn't mind seeing you check raise here. Again, you can't always do this, right? You can't always check raise every single king jack, king queen, queen 9, queen jack, jack 9, 9 7, 9 6. You're overdoing it. Mixing it up is key. But this hand specifically also has the backdoor flush draw, so I don't mind seeing you check raise here. I kind of like it. So your opponent calls. Once he bets third pot on the flop, maybe he bet his full range and bet call ace high. Maybe he has check behinds on the flop. Either way, this ace is not a great card for you, right? We can sometimes check raise hands like ace 10, ace deuce, ace 8. We can sometimes have ace high flush draws, but other than that, it's not the greatest card. What is great is our blockers, right? If villain bets third pot and then calls, he's going to call with hands like ace king, ace queen, which we block. So I wouldn't actually hate bluffing here. However, you have to be very careful because this is just not a good card for you. If you had a hand like king 10, your hand was very good on the flop, now it's okay, right? So you have to be careful on this card, but I wouldn't hate if you ended up bluffing. I think we don't have to check our full range on this turn. And so this could be a good bluffing hand. Check raising would be quite aggressive, but wouldn't even be the worst play either. So villain checks behind pretty quickly. So he could definitely have checked behind a hand like, 9-6, whatnot, jack 9 perhaps. But mostly I think he would have bet. The ace is such a good card for him, and, he can definitely represent it. So when he checks behind pretty quickly, I think he represents a hand that we're not winning against, but a hand which is not very good. A hand like, for instance, queen 9, sorry, queen 9 is, queen 9 actually is behind our king queen. I mean a hand like queen 8, let's say, or a hand like, jack 10, something like that, pocket 9s. Pretty good hand, but not a great one. So I wouldn't hate if you ended up bluffing really big here, but the hand selection is not fantastic. If you had a hand like queen 9, well, now you've got only queen high, not king high, and also you block the straight, which is kind of nice to have, right? So in theory, this hand probably is mostly going to be a give up, but if you believe that this opponent will fold too much if you apply a lot of pressure, then by all means go ahead and be aggressive. So as you see, he did have a hand we talked about, like, an 8 or a 10, something like that. And had you bet big, you may have gotten a fold out of him. So this is a classic spot where, if I played this hand, I usually would not bluff it. Sometimes I would. But I have to remind myself of playing NL50, and a lot of these players probably are a bit weak and nitty. And if you apply a lot of pressure, you will get him to fold a lot of hands. So you should probably be a bit more aggressive than Pio Solver would be. We open ace king under the gun and we get a very bad flop. Out of position is going to have all the sets, and he's going to have hands like 4-3 suited and maybe 8-4 suited. Definitely 9-8 suited, maybe 9-8 offsuit. Probably not, but he might, and he's going to have two pairs and, pair plus open-enders and gut shots and flush draws. It's just a great board for him and not a great board for us. So we should be doing a lot of checking behind. And so ace-king is a hand which has some showdown value. Cannot really bluff that effectively, and it just keeps getting worse for us. We're just hoping to get the showdown here. He checks pretty quickly, so again, he may have some kind of medium strength hands, but we're just hoping he has some kind of, king 10, which we dominate anyway, and we try and get the showdown. Now, that's obviously a fantastic card. If villain bets a reasonable amount, you probably would have to call. If villain checks, I think a value bet makes sense, and not a huge one. Villain often would bet a sad or 2-pair or a straight on the turn, or on the river. So I think this is a good play. Wouldn't be the worst spot for a check raise. but Minnie Mouse folds. 6-7 is a little bit loose to open, but you could do it. Meanwhile, 10-8 is a bit of a loose defend. We're seeing some standard folds. Don't sweat it if you don't get good cards for a while. Just play your ranges. Sometimes you get a bunch of good cards in a row. Sometimes you don't. 10-7 again is a loose open, but you can make it. I've seen quite a few hands now that you maybe could have opened and it would have been a bit loose, but you seem to be snap folding all of them. So I'd like to see you take your time a little bit more. I would also like to see you open a bit smaller because the big blind is quite a bit shorter. Meanwhile, King 10 is going to be mostly defend. You could occasionally 3-bet if you wanted to. Easy fold, of course, with Queen 8. And this is a very interesting board. It's going to pop up eventually. So 8-6-6 is a very interesting board. When you defend the big blind, you're going to have a lot of 8x, 6x, 9-7 suited, that type of stuff. So this is a board where if villain were to just bet its whole range, you have to check raise extremely aggressively. And King 10 is a nice hand to do it with. You have the backdoor straight draw, you have the backdoor flush draw, you have 2 overcards, you block 2 overpairs. You block hands like 10-6 suited. So I'd actually like to see you check raise here. Probably would have gone a little bit larger with my raise size, but yeah, I think this sizing is a little bit too small, but I get what you're doing. 9-7 is a little bit too loose to play. We definitely should have opened it in the cutoff, but we can't really play it against an open raise in front of us. I like the check raise there. A good play. I like it a lot. You have to be very aggressive on a board like that. Something I would expect to happen in these games is that people over c-bet a lot of boards, and so check raising at a high frequency is even more important than it would be in my games where people do a lot of mixing. On a board like that, a lot of regs in my pool may only c-bet like 50%. But if most of the opponents in your pool c-bet 100% on that board, the counter strategy should be a lot more aggressive. I like 3x in the small blind. I would definitely not recommend a limp. That doesn't mean that limping cannot be a good play in theory. It definitely can be. But I don't think that in this game, having a limping range in any spot makes sense. 4-6 suited, I would actually hate a call. It's a pretty, it's a well-connected hand. Also, villain is playing 33 VPIP, which is quite loose. So far I saw, again, a couple of tight folds, which makes sense because of the rake. But this hand I would like to see you call. Kind of annoying because we've got a bad gut shot. Against a quarter pot, though, we absolutely cannot fold. So this hand, we don't have the greatest hand to check raise with, but we can do it sometimes. Mostly you want to call. I mean, the difference between this and a hand like, for instance, 10-9 suited is pretty substantial. Because we obviously don't like seeing a club, and even if the turn is a 5, I mean, obviously we're happy, but we don't have the nuts just yet. If the river, let's say, then is a jack, 10-9 beats us again. But again, I don't hate check raising. I'd rather see you be a little bit too loose here and a bit too tight. 7s is mostly going to be a call, but can sometimes be 3-bet as well. We're seeing this opponent play 29 VPIP. If your eyes are really, really good, you can see the 29 VPIP in the background. And that's pretty loose. So against a pretty loose opponent, we need to be loose ourselves. So I don't mind this. Against a good opponent, you would also have to call a 4-bet. Obviously, it's not a great spot because 7s don't have that much playability in a big pot, but I do think it's winning. Ace-3 suited, meanwhile, I don't mind if you 3-bet. You're spending a lot of time moving your mouse and setting up the sizing. You should probably have some kind of software to help you out. Obviously, not some kind of illegal software, don't get me wrong. Some kind of software like on Stars, you'd have Stars Helper, and it will set up the sizes for you. So, if you save a few seconds almost every single hand, in the end you probably play a few more hands an hour, and so you make a little bit more money. Meanwhile, we see a king 8-8 flop, which again is very, very interesting because the king is obviously much better for us, right? We have all the pocket kings, all the ace kings, all the king queens, whatnot, whereas villain doesn't have all of those. He'll have some. But then we see an 8, which is, okay for us. We're going to have some hands like 8-7 and ace-8. But then again, he's going to have some 8x2. So it's one of those boards where, c-betting, like, you don't want to check range, obviously. C-betting range is a little bit much. So you probably end up somewhere in the middle. But then again, you could end up c-betting your whole range. It's very opponent dependent. I would expect to see most people c-bet range here, which is fine. So we see a 3 turn, which is an interesting card. Villain called pretty quickly. Villain could have floated 3s on the flop, but then again we block him. So you could turn this hand into some type of merge bluff, but it's a little bit aggressive. So probably just want to check this one here, and hope to beat hands like ace queen, ace jack. Hope to check call against a hand like jack ten of hearts that puts in a bet somewhere. Villain should not do an insane amount of betting here. And on the river, again, we beat ace high, we unblock some hands that float and may bluff, so very easy check. Meanwhile, we open king jack, which is good, and on 10 deuce deuce, we get to c-bet aggressively. Okay, so villain immediately check behind. He, maybe he's a little bit scared to value bet the river thinly. I think he could have value bet there, but it's not a big deal. I don't mind if you were to c-bet your whole range on a board like this. And we cannot fold much against the check raise here, but if you fold king jack with no backdoors, that's okay. Especially in this lineup where I expect a lot of villains to be too nitty. So, bluff catching very light is not really the best way to make a lot of money in these games. Ace 3, meanwhile, doesn't play very well because your ace is so dominated. And here we can definitely consider something. So again, I don't like that you're folding so quickly. 9-7 there could be a call. It usually isn't, but if you see that, let's say you're playing big fish, then maybe it is a call. So I'd like to see you take your time a little bit more in these unconventional hands to figure out if you can adjust. Meanwhile, queen 8 is a loose open, but it's okay. I would expect a lot of your opponents to not really be too loose in the big blind, not really defend that much, not really 3-bet you that much, not really, go crazy raising on the flop. So you can get away with a little bit more. Again, 6-3 suited, maybe you can open raise. It's not standard, but maybe you could have. So I'm seeing that with a lot of the students that, they try and play as many hands as possible, and then they sometimes forget what's most important always, and that's quality of play, right? Obviously, you shouldn't tank for the sake of tanking, but sometimes in order to get in as much volume as possible, they miss out on all these small edges. And that's also not a good thing. Queen Jack 6 is a board I very recently simmed, so I know this board quite well. No matter what you do, you have to be aggressive on this board, obviously. I mean, we're going to have more good queens, we're going to have more good jacks, we're going to have more sets like queens and jacks. And so because of that, and also there's no flush draw to worry about, we're also going to have hands like kings and aces, so no matter what, you have to be aggressive on a board like this. Now, queen 8 is one of those hands that gets 2 streets of value, so I wouldn't mind if it lets you bet the flop, check the turn, bet the river. I wouldn't mind having a checking range and let's say checking the flop and then betting turn and river either. 9-8 suited standard open raise, and we see something unusual. Oh, and that was before I saw the lead. When you see recreational players lead out on boards that are quite good for you, that's just to tell they've got it, I mean, we've got 4 or 5 suited, we've got 4s, we've got 5s, we've got ace 4, we've got ace 5, we've got aces and ace king and ace queen. Why would you lead into us? We're doing so well. But then he does it anyway, and that's usually because he just has something. So yeah, with 9-8, it's tempting to float. I think I would just fold. Now, if you believe that this guy's crazy, then by all means go ahead and do something. Also, so far he's played 0 VPIP, which also really doesn't inspire us to, go crazy and like bluff raise flop and, bomb turn shove river. In position bets half pot on queen jack 6 and easy call. Our hand is obviously way too strong to fold, but a little bit weak to check raise. It's just a good, upper middle type strength hand. Wow, that was amazing English. Upper middle strength type of hand. Let's call it that. The 4 is obviously a great card for us. Not because we hit it so often. I mean, we could have hit queen 4 or jack 4 suited, of course. but the 4 just doesn't help him very much. We river top 2 pair and, well, I guess second top 2 pair, whatever you want to call it. Villain very quickly check behind. So could he have checked behind 10-9? Sure, but it's unlikely, right? He usually would just bet the turn. So I would like to see either check raise here or bet yourself. I would guess that villain is not going to bet the river a whole lot. I'd probably bet myself. And you can basically pick any sizing you like. Against 4x, 10-9 is not a call. I think that's an okay sizing. A lot of tanking. Okay, so this is kind of close with the 7s. So on the one hand, I mean, we're getting a pretty good price, but on the other hand, our opponent is not very deep, right? He's also been playing 12 VPIP. So at least if we flop a set and he's very nitty, you know, we're bound to make a lot of money. So be careful calling all of these pairs out of position, right? All of the 9s and down, because that doesn't happen. Yes, you're getting a bit of a better price, but villain doesn't have a full stack. I don't hate seeing you call, though. This player may also be a recreational player. And this is a really ugly spot because, I mean, we've got 2 pair, but there's so many bad runouts for us, and it's going to be very difficult for us to realize our equity. So villain checks behind. Most people would just bet the whole range, or at least do a lot of betting. With 7s here, I don't really see much value. I mean, you could block bet against ace, queen, ace, king, I guess, but then they're going to call or raise you, and then you'll be in trouble on the river. Checking is the standard play, I would say. Meanwhile, jack 5 suited, calling is the standard play. I guess you could bluff 3-bet if you wanted to. And jack 5 is tempting to float, but against an 18 VPIP player, you're seeing a lot of these very nitty regs, and so against them, being super loose with defense is not the right way to go. And with 7s, just hoping to get the showdown. I guess you could bet like quarter pot if you wanted to, try and get value from ace king, but it's unlikely, right? You're mostly getting called by hands like, you know, ace 10 suited, whatnot. Or you split. I don't really like villain's play. He should at least bet the flop. So I understand what you're doing with the jack 5. I mean, you have some decent backdoors. Problem is you're doing it against a very nitty opponent. So I get it. You know, you've got a backdoor straight draw, you've got a backdoor flush draw. You need to raise this board sometimes. It's obviously not a board you're going to raise extremely often because, I mean, you don't have kings, you don't have queens, you don't have ace king, you don't have king queen suited. You will have king queen offsuit sometimes. So I understand what you're doing. But, you know, I don't generally try and get really nitty players off really strong hands, like recreational players at least. The 5 looks like you have a lot of showdown value, but you don't really. Villain seems to snap check the river, and now we just check, hope to beat ace jack, but we probably do lose king 10. I mean, the queen is maybe a scare card to him, so he doesn't want to bet his king, and then obviously we still lose. And we don't get to represent the queen very well, because if we raise the flop, we mostly raise with a king ourselves, right? Not really with a queen very often. So this is a very weird spot. So the guak, let's call him the guak, 3-bets really large, button versus cutoff. And so pocket 10s would have been even a nice 4-bet hand. But then we see the big blind who snap calls, right? And the big blind is kind of deep with the button. So and he's been playing 50 VPIP, but that's 2 hands, so that means nothing. So that player may be a recreational player. So on the one hand, I mean, we definitely can't fold. We're getting a great price. We have a good hand. We're also a little bit deeper. So if we flop a set, we potentially make a bit more money. So calling is, I would say, definitely a winning option. I think 4-betting is even a cool option too. You know, if you make the guak fold a hand like ace queen off, that's not a big thing. And then you'll usually have the best hand against the big blind. So I actually think that's a pretty cool option. Meanwhile, ace jack is just a fold. So both plays are winning, but I think actually 4-bet is kind of cool. One thing you have to be careful of is calling too many 3-bets, like big 3-bets out of position, right? You went 2.5, which by the way I don't recommend. I recommend something around 2.2. So when villain goes to like 7 or 7.5, that's a regular 3-bet. But villain went to 10. That's a big upcharge. So obviously you don't want to be out of position against these big 3-bets as much as against small 3-bets. And so villain bets some kind of funny sizing, about 40% pot. I think this hand we should call. Villain can still definitely have like hands like ace-5 and 6-5, king-jack, king-10, that type of stuff, flush draws. But it's not a great spot. It's not a great spot to be in. I mean, he 3-bet huge, and now he c-bets 3-way. So even though I think we should call, I don't really hate it. So let's cover this 9s in, and we look at some questions. Again, you call, you've called pairs out of position 3 times now. It's okay so far. I didn't see any spots where it was obviously not good. But be careful, right? You can't just call every pair 100% of the time. And against this, again, this almost 40% pot size, I think we should just fold. This board is especially bad for us. It's way worse for us than the queen 4-3 board. Problem is that villain has 5-4, maybe an ace-5, an ace-4, an ace-king, an ace-queen. And even if he has any like jack-10 suited, he can just barrel us off our hand. It's not like we can just call this one down. I like to fold. I mean, you're making a lot of nitty folds, but so far I think most of them have been correct. I do worry slightly. Let's look at this play. I do worry slightly that you're making a lot of folds, not only against nitty players that are not bluffing, but you may also be folding against other players against whom you should be not folding so much. So we open ace-3, which is kind of loose, but I get it. And now I think villain is about to shove. Yeah, okay, obviously that's not good, right?